The evening sky was turning purple as Dr. Maya Richardson drove home from Metro General Hospital. Her shoulders were tight after a 12-hour shift in the operating room, and all she could think about was the warm bath waiting for her at home. The streets were quiet, with only a few cars passing by in the suburban neighborhood. The flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror caught her by surprise. Maya checked her speedometer. She'd been going exactly the speed limit. With a small sigh, she pulled over to the curb, making sure to stop under a bright street light. Her father's words from years ago echoed in her mind. Always stay visible, always stay calm. She kept her hands on the steering wheel, right where they could be seen. Through her side mirror, she watched the police officer approach. Something about his walk, the aggressive way he held his shoulders, made her stomach tighten. She reached over slowly and turned on her phone's voice recorder, another habit her parents had taught her. License and registration, the officer barked before he'd even reached her window. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. Maya noticed he wasn't wearing his name badge properly. It was turned sideways, making it hard to read. But she could make out Officer Barrett on it. "Good evening, officer," she said politely, keeping her voice steady. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "I said license and registration," he repeated, louder this time. His flashlight beam shot directly into her eyes, making her squint. "And turn off that engine right now." Maya complied, turning off the car. "I'm going to reach for my purse to get my license," she announced clearly, moving slowly. "My registration is in the glove compartment." "Just hurry up," Barrett snapped. Maya could smell coffee on his breath as he leaned closer to her window. His hand was resting on his belt, uncomfortably close to his weapon. As she reached for her purse, she noticed him tense up. "Your taillight's out," he finally said, though Maya knew that wasn't true. She just had her car serviced last week. "Officer, I believe there must be a mistake. I had my car checked just." "Oh, you're going to tell me how to do my job now?" His voice rose sharply. "Think you know better than me, do you?" Maya's heart began to race, but she kept her voice calm. "No, sir. I'm just trying to understand." "Get out of the car," he demanded suddenly, reaching for her door handle. "Officer, I don't understand why." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Maya turned to reach for her license, Barrett's arm shot through her window. His fist was aimed at her face, but years of kickboxing training kicked in. She raised her arm in a defensive block, deflecting the blow while simultaneously pressing the emergency button on her phone. Her dashboard camera was recording everything. Other cars were beginning to slow down, their headlights illuminating the scene. Someone shouted from a nearby vehicle. Maya's mind raced through her options. She was a respected neurosurgeon, someone who saved lives for a living. Today, she needed to save her own. But she also knew this moment was bigger than just her. This was about every person who'd ever faced abuse of power, every victim who'd never gotten justice. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear as she spoke into her phone. "I am being assaulted by Officer Barrett. I am unarmed. I am complying with all legal orders. I need immediate assistance." More cars were stopping now. The officer stepped back, suddenly aware of the phones recording him from multiple angles. Maya stayed perfectly still, her hands back on the steering wheel, her eyes straight ahead. She was no longer just Dr. Maya Richardson heading home from work. She was becoming something else. A witness, a survivor, and soon, a catalyst for change. The night air was thick with tension as red and blue lights continued to flash, casting shadows that danced across the pavement. Maya knew that what happened in the next few minutes would matter not just for her, but for countless others. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for whatever came next. This was only the beginning. Time seemed to freeze in that moment as Officer Barrett realized his mistake. The street had transformed from a quiet suburban road into an impromptu courtroom, with dozens of phone cameras serving as silent witnesses. Maya's blocked punch had caught him off guard. He clearly hadn't expected a petite doctor to have such quick reflexes. "Step out of the vehicle now," Barrett shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. His face had turned red, and a vein pulsed visibly on his forehead. But Maya noticed his confidence wavering as more cars pulled over. "I will not exit my vehicle unless you call for a supervisor," Maya replied firmly, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. She kept her dash cam running, its small red light a reminder that everything was being recorded. "I have reasonable fear for my safety after you attempted to assault me." A young couple had stopped their car across the street. The woman was live-streaming everything while her partner called 911. An elderly man in a pickup truck had pulled over too, his headlights illuminating the scene from another angle. Maya could hear him describing the situation to someone on his phone. Barrett's radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, please respond. We've received multiple calls about an incident at your location." Maya watched in her mirror as Barrett stepped back from her car, his body language shifting from aggressive to defensive. He grabbed his radio, speaking in quick, clipped tones. "Situation under control. Just a routine traffic stop." But it was far from routine, and everyone knew it. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk now, maintaining a safe distance but making their presence known. Someone had started a live stream, narrating what they'd witnessed. "This officer just tried to hit her, and she blocked it like a boss. She's just sitting there calm as can be, and he's the one looking scared now." Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Lee, her colleague from the hospital. "Are you okay? Someone just shared a live stream, and I recognize your car. Need backup." Her hands were steady now as she typed back. "I'm okay. Multiple witnesses. Keep watching the stream. Document everything." Barrett paced beside her car, running his hands through his hair. His earlier bravado had crumbled in the face of so many witnesses. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension. Backup was arriving, but not the kind Barrett had hoped for. 2 more patrol cars pulled up, followed by a vehicle with supervisor markings. Maya recognized the supervisor stepping out, Captain Reynolds, who had spoken at several community meetings about improving police-community relations. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Officer Barrett, step away from the vehicle," Reynolds commanded, his voice carrying authority that Barrett's had tried and failed to project. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm unharmed," Maya responded clearly. "But I want to file a formal complaint. I have video evidence of Officer Barrett attempting to assault me during a traffic stop that appears to have no legitimate basis." Reynolds' face was grim as he assessed the situation. The crowd had grown larger, but remained peaceful, their phones still recording every moment. Some were already uploading clips to social media, where Maya's story was beginning to spread like wildfire. A female officer approached Maya's window with a professional demeanor that sharply contrasted Barrett's aggression. "Dr. Richardson, I'm Officer Chen. Would you feel comfortable stepping out now? We need to get your statement." Maya nodded, finally releasing her grip on the steering wheel. As she gathered her things, she could hear Reynolds reading Barrett his rights. The tables had turned dramatically in less than 30 minutes. Local news vans were starting to arrive, their bright lights adding to the surreal atmosphere. Maya stood tall as she exited her car, her doctor's coat still crisp despite the evening's events. She noticed people in the crowd nudging each other, pointing at her hospital ID badge. She was no longer just another victim of police harassment, she was Dr. Maya Richardson, and her story would be different. As she walked toward Officer Chen's car to give her statement, Maya's mind was already racing ahead. This incident wouldn't be brushed under the rug or settled quietly. She had the evidence, the witnesses, and most importantly, the determination to ensure real change would come from this night. The evening breeze carried snippets of conversation from the crowd. "Did you see how calm she stayed? That could have gone so differently." Finally, someone caught it all on video. Maya took a deep breath of the cool night air. Her bath would have to wait. There was important work to be done. The next few hours would be crucial in transforming this traumatic encounter into a catalyst for meaningful change. As she sat in Officer Chen's car, preparing to give her statement, Maya knew that her fight for justice was just beginning. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Maya finally walked through her front door. She hadn't slept all night, but adrenaline kept her wide awake. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she left the police station. News travels fast in the age of social media. Dropping her keys on the kitchen counter, she noticed her hands trembling slightly. The events of the night were finally catching up with her. She poured herself a glass of water and sank into her favorite armchair, letting out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her living room wall, usually displaying her medical degrees and awards, now reflected the soft morning light. The irony wasn't lost on her, how quickly life could shift from saving lives in an operating room to fighting for justice in the streets. Her phone lit up again. This time it was a message from Dr. Thompson, the hospital's chief of surgery. Just saw the news. Take all the time you need. We've got your back. The support was pouring in from everywhere. The dashcam footage had gone viral overnight, with millions of views across different platforms. Her inbox was flooded with messages from civil rights organizations, news outlets, and countless individuals sharing similar stories. Maya opened her laptop and clicked on one of the trending news clips. There she was, standing composed in her doctor's coat while giving a statement to reporters. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever faced abuse of power. It's about holding those who swear to protect and serve accountable to that oath. The clip cut to Officer Barrett's police union representative, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Officer Barrett is a decorated member of the force with years of service. We'd ask the public to withhold judgment until all facts are known. Maya shook her head, remembering how different Barrett had looked at the station compared to his aggressive demeanor during the traffic stop. He'd refused to meet her eyes as Captain Reynolds escorted him to the Internal Affairs office. Her doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Mrs. Wu, her elderly neighbor, holding a container of what smelled like homemade soup. "I saw what happened on the news," Mrs. Wu said when Maya opened the door. "My grandson showed me the video. You were so brave. I brought you some comfort food. You must be exhausted." This simple act of kindness brought tears to Maya's eyes for the first time since the incident. She invited Mrs. Wu in, and they sat in her kitchen, talking about how the neighborhood had changed over the years, both good and bad. As they talked, Maya's phone rang again. This time it was Attorney Lee, a well-known civil rights lawyer whose work she'd admired for years. "Dr. Richardson, what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. We've been building a case about systematic issues within the department. Your video could be the evidence we need to push for real change." Maya listened intently as Lee explained the bigger picture. Similar incidents had been reported before, but many victims didn't have Maya's advantages: video evidence, professional status, and multiple witnesses. She could help give voice to those who hadn't been heard. By afternoon, her story had made national news. The hospital's public relations team had set up a press conference for the next day, but Maya insisted it be held at the community center instead of the hospital. "This isn't about me being a doctor," she explained. "This is about being human." She spent the rest of the day preparing her statement with Attorney Lee, reviewing the dashcam footage, and documenting every detail while it was fresh in her memory. Her dining room table became a command center covered with legal papers, supporter messages, and research about similar cases. A text from Officer Chen provided some hope. "Internal Affairs is taking this seriously. Barrett's been placed on immediate leave. Your complaint isn't the first, but it might be the one that finally sticks." As evening approached, Maya stood at her window, watching kids play in the street outside. A community meeting had been organized for that weekend. Signs were already going up: "Justice for Dr. Richardson" and "Reform Now." But Maya knew this had to be about more than just her case. She opened her laptop and began typing, "Dear Captain Reynolds, I want to propose a collaboration." She had their attention now. It was time to turn this incident into real, lasting change. The system needed fixing, not just punishment of one officer. The setting sun cast long shadows across her keyboard as she worked. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: press conferences, legal meetings, and probably pushback from those resistant to change. But tonight, Maya felt stronger than ever. Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best opportunities for transformation. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from a young nurse at her hospital. "You showed us that standing up for what's right isn't just about being loud. It's about being smart, being prepared, and being brave. Thank you." Maya smiled, saving the message. This was just the beginning of a longer journey, but she wasn't walking it alone. Sometimes the path to justice starts with one person standing their ground, but it takes a community to create real change. The Internal Affairs office was quieter than Maya expected. She sat in a conference room with Attorney Lee, watching Lieutenant Cooper spread files across the table. Each folder told a story, previous complaints against Officer Barrett that had never made it past preliminary investigation. "This one's from 3 months ago," Cooper said, opening a thick folder. A college student claimed Barrett used excessive force during a routine traffic stop. "No video evidence, case dismissed." She paused, looking directly at Maya. "But your case is different. We have multiple videos, dozens of witnesses, and your dashcam footage is crystal clear." Maya leaned forward, studying the pattern of complaints. "How many others?" she asked quietly. 15 complaints in the last 2 years, Cooper replied, her voice heavy with meaning. "Most from minority drivers, most dismissed due to lack of evidence." The wall-mounted TV played silent news footage of peaceful protesters gathering outside police headquarters. Someone had made signs with Maya's quote, "This isn't just about me." The movement was growing bigger than anyone had expected. Maya's phone vibrated, another message from the hospital. Her colleagues had started a medical professionals coalition for police reform. Even Dr. Thompson, usually hesitant about political involvement, had signed on as a founding member. "We've uncovered something else," Cooper continued, pulling out another file. "Barrett's body camera was turned off during your encounter. Department policy requires it to be on during all civilian interactions. But here's what's interesting. We found a pattern. His camera was malfunctioning during several other complaint incidents." Attorney Lee took detailed notes while Maya processed this information. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture bigger than one bad officer. This was about a system that had allowed problems to persist unchecked. A knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Chen entered with a laptop. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a police database. "We've been cross-referencing Barrett's shift records with complaint dates. Look at these traffic stop statistics." The numbers told a clear story. Barrett's stops disproportionately targeted minority drivers, especially in affluent neighborhoods like Maya's. The data backed up what community members had been saying for years. "There's more," Chen added, scrolling through records. 3 other officers showed similar patterns when partnered with Barrett. "We're expanding the investigation." Maya remembered the young couple who'd filmed her encounter, the elderly man in his truck, Mrs. Wu with her soup. Each person who'd stepped up had helped build this moment, turning one incident into a catalyst for deeper change. Outside the conference room, phones rang constantly as more people came forward with their own stories. The investigation had opened a floodgate of testimonies, each one adding weight to the call for reform. "We're also looking into the department's training protocols," Cooper explained. Barrett's academy records show minimal de-escalation training. The department switched to a more aggressive approach 5 years ago when the previous chief took over. Maya stood up and walked to the window. Below, more protesters had gathered, their signs visible from even this height. Among them, she spotted hospital staff in scrubs, standing alongside community members from all walks of life. "What happens next?" she asked, turning back to the room. "The evidence is strong," Attorney Lee replied. "But this isn't just about prosecuting Barrett anymore. We're looking at departmental policies, training programs, oversight mechanisms. The whole system needs review." Maya's phone lit up with another message, this time from a police reform organization in another state. Her case was inspiring others to take action, pushing for similar investigations in their own communities. Cooper gathered the files, her expression determined. "We'll need you to testify before the police commission next week. They're convening a special session to review department policies. Your story, it's becoming a turning point." As they left the building that evening, Maya noticed something different in the faces of officers they passed. Some nodded respectfully, others looked away, but all seemed aware that change was coming. Her case had cracked open a door that had been sealed for too long. In her car, Maya found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. It was from a young police cadet. "Thank you for helping us clean up our house. Some of us joined to protect and serve. We want to do it right." The setting sun painted the city in soft orange light as Maya drove home. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more evidence reviews, more steps toward justice. But tonight, she felt the weight of responsibility and hope in equal measure. Real change takes time, but it starts with moments like these, when truth comes to light and people find the courage to stand together for what's right. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Maya walked up, Attorney Lee by her side. The morning sun glinted off their camera lenses, creating tiny spotlights that danced across the granite walls. This wasn't just another hearing, it was the day they would present their case for systemic reform. Inside the courtroom, Maya noticed the diverse crowd that had gathered. Community leaders sat alongside off-duty police officers who supported reform. Medical colleagues in white coats mixed with local residents in everyday clothes. All of them were here to witness what had grown far beyond a single incident of police misconduct. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Wilson entered. The judge, known for her fair-minded approach to police reform cases, surveyed the packed courtroom with steady eyes. Attorney Lee started by playing Maya's dashcam video. Even though Maya had seen it dozens of times during preparation, watching it in the formal courtroom setting made her heart race. The gasps from the gallery reminded her how shocking the footage still was to fresh eyes. "What you've just seen," Lee addressed the court, "is not an isolated incident. We've uncovered 47 similar complaints filed against officers in this department over the past 3 years. Most were dismissed without thorough investigation. Today, we're not just seeking justice for Dr. Richardson, we're asking for comprehensive departmental reform." The police union's lawyer tried to paint Barrett as a dedicated officer who'd made a single mistake. But Lee was prepared. She projected a chart showing Barrett's history of complaints, each dot on the timeline representing someone who hadn't had Maya's advantages of video evidence and professional status. During a brief recess, Maya stepped into the hallway for water. A young police officer approached her, speaking quietly. "I've been on the force 2 years," she said. "What happened to you? It's why some of us are afraid to report problems we see. Thank you for being brave enough to fight this." Back in the courtroom, Lee presented their proposed reforms: mandatory de-escalation training, stronger oversight committees, body camera requirements with strict compliance monitoring, and community involvement in police training programs. The real surprise came when Captain Reynolds took the stand. Instead of defending the department's current practices, he acknowledged the need for change. "We can't police effectively without community trust," he testified. "This case has shown us where we failed. We need to do better." Maya's phone buzzed silently in her pocket, another message from the hospital. The Medical Professionals Coalition had grown to include healthcare workers from 3 neighboring cities. They were all watching this case, hoping it would set a precedent for their own communities. As Lee questioned Reynolds, Maya studied the jury's faces. They represented a cross-section of the city: teachers, office workers, retirees, young professionals. Each one seemed to understand that their decision would impact not just Maya's case, but the future of police-community relations. During the lunch break, Maya sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse cafe. An elderly janitor stopped by her table. "My grandson wants to be a police officer," he said softly. "But he's scared about the culture he'd be joining. Maybe after this, things will be different for him." The afternoon session brought Barrett to the stand. He looked different now, humbled, perhaps even ashamed. Under questioning, he admitted to turning off his body camera deliberately, not just during Maya's stop, but many others. His testimony revealed a departmental culture that had enabled such behavior. As the day drew to a close, Lee delivered her final argument. She didn't call for vengeance or punishment alone, but for transformation. "This is an opportunity," she told the court, "to turn a moment of injustice into a movement for positive change. Dr. Richardson doesn't just want compensation. She wants reform that will protect everyone in our community, including good police officers who want to serve with honor." Outside, the setting sun painted the courthouse in warm light. Supporters had gathered with candles, creating a peaceful vigil for justice. Maya spotted Mrs. Wu among them, standing next to that same young couple who'd recorded her traffic stop. A reporter approached, asking how she felt. Maya looked at the diverse crowd, all united in hope for change, and replied, "This isn't the end. It's a beginning. Real change takes time, but it starts with people coming together and saying enough." Later that night, as Maya drove home, she passed a police car. The officer inside gave her a respectful nod, a small gesture that suggested times were already changing. Her phone lit up with messages of support, but one stood out. It was from a police cadet. "Your case is now part of our training. They're teaching us how to do better." The stars were out by the time Maya reached home. Tomorrow, they would return to court for more testimony, more evidence, more steps toward justice. But tonight, she felt the weight of hope in the air. Sometimes the hardest moments in life become catalysts for the most important changes. As she looked up at the night sky, Maya knew that whatever the verdict, their fight for reform had already begun to make a difference. 6 months after the courthouse battle, Maya stood in front of a very different audience. Instead of judges and lawyers, she faced a room full of police cadets and veteran officers. The police academy's training room buzzed with nervous energy as she prepared to share her story. "I'm not here to point fingers," she began, her voice carrying to the back of the room. "I'm here because we all want the same thing, a safer community for everyone." The tension in the room began to ease as she spoke about her vision for change, rather than dwelling on past wrongs. Captain Reynolds, who had become an unexpected ally, stood at the back of the room. The past months had brought surprising transformations. After the court's ruling mandated departmental reforms, he had volunteered to lead the change initiative. Now he watched as Maya, once a victim of police misconduct, helped train his officers. "De-escalation isn't just about following procedures," Maya explained, clicking to a new slide. "It's about remembering that every person you interact with is human, just like you." She played clips from her dashcam video, but now used them as teaching tools rather than evidence of wrongdoing. A young officer raised her hand. "How do we balance safety concerns with treating everyone respectfully, especially in high-stress situations?" Maya smiled. It was the question she'd been waiting for. She pulled up another video, this time showing positive interactions between officers and community members. These clips had been recorded over the past few months as part of the new training program. During the break, an older officer approached Maya. "I've been on the force 20 years, he said, his voice gruff but sincere. "Never thought I'd see changes like this. Some of us were against it at first, but seeing the results." He gestured to a group of cadets eagerly discussing the morning's lessons. "Maybe this is how it always should have been." The afternoon session brought something new. Community members joined the training. Local residents, business owners, and youth leaders sat with officers in small groups, sharing experiences and perspectives. The walls between us and them began to crumble as people found common ground. Maya walked between the groups, listening to conversations that would have seemed impossible months ago. A teenager described feeling scared during traffic stops, while an officer shared his own anxieties about approaching cars at night. Together, they brainstormed ways to make these interactions safer and more respectful for everyone. Back in her office at the hospital that evening, Maya reviewed feedback forms from the training session. Her phone buzzed with a message from Officer Chen, who had become both friend and ally. "The cadets can't stop talking about today's session. You're changing minds one story at a time." The wall of Maya's office now held something new alongside her medical degrees, a certificate of appreciation from the police department's reform committee. But more meaningful were the photos below it, showing community police basketball games, joint volunteer projects, and training sessions where officers and residents worked together. Her computer dinged with an email from the National Police Reform Organization. Other cities were requesting information about their training program. What had started as one terrible night was spreading ripples of change across the country. Maya opened her calendar to schedule more training sessions. A knock at her door revealed Dr. Thompson, still in surgical scrubs. "Just finished a complicated surgery," he said, "but I wanted to catch you before you left." "The medical police cooperation program you suggested, it's making a difference. Emergency room reports of police-civilian conflicts are down 60%. As she packed up for the day, Maya remembered Barrett. He had resigned from the force after the court ruling, but his last act had been unexpected. A public apology and a commitment to join reform efforts in other departments. Sometimes transformation came from unlikely places. The sun was setting as Maya left the hospital. She passed a police car doing neighborhood rounds and noticed something different. The officer was out of his car, chatting with kids playing basketball in the park. Small changes, adding up day by day. That evening, Maya sat in her living room, updating the training manual. Her phone filled with messages from the day's participants, officers sharing insights, community members offering suggestions, everyone working toward the same goal. Mrs. Wu dropped by with her famous soup again, but this time she brought a guest, her grandson, now enrolled in the police academy. "He says your story is part of their first week training," she said proudly. They're learning to be the kind of officers we always hoped for. Maya smiled, remembering how far they'd come. The lawsuit had been just the beginning. Real change happened in these quiet moments, in training rooms and community meetings, in honest conversations and small daily choices. As night fell, she added a final note to the training materials. Change isn't about forgetting the past. It's about learning from it to build a better future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Maya felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most meaningful transformations. 1 year had passed since that fateful traffic stop. Maya stood at the podium in the community center, looking out at faces that had become familiar over months of working together. The room was packed for the first anniversary of the Police Community Partnership Program, a direct result of her case. A year ago, Maya began, her voice steady and warm. I couldn't have imagined being here. But sometimes life's hardest moments lead us to our most important work. She gestured to the display behind her, showing statistics that told a story of real change. Complaints down by 70%, community trust up by 65%, and officer job satisfaction improved by 50%. In the front row sat Mrs. Wu, beaming with pride. Her grandson had graduated from the police academy last month, part of the first class to complete the new training program. Next to her was that same young couple who'd recorded the original incident. They now led community oversight committees. Captain Reynolds stepped up to share his perspective. When Dr. Richardson first proposed these changes, some of us were skeptical, he admitted. But look around this room. Look at what we've built together. He pointed to the walls, covered with photos of the past year's achievements, joint community projects, youth programs, and training sessions that had brought people together. A young officer stood to share her story. Last week, I had a traffic stop that could have gone badly, she said. But I remembered Dr. Richardson's training. Instead of escalating, I listened. Turned out the driver was rushing to the hospital for his wife's labor. I ended up escorting them there safely. The audience clapped, but Maya noticed something more significant, the genuine smiles exchanged between officers and community members. These weren't just polite gestures, they were signs of real trust being built day by day. Dr. Thompson took the stage next, presenting data from the hospital's perspective. Emergency room visits from police encounters have dropped dramatically, he reported. But more importantly, we're seeing officers bringing people to us for help rather than taking them to jail when mental health is the real issue. Maya's phone buzzed quietly. Another message from the National Police Reform Organization. Their program had been adopted by 12 other cities, with more requesting guidance every week. What had started as one woman's stand for justice had grown into a movement for positive change across the country. The afternoon's agenda included breaking into small groups where officers and residents shared meals while discussing local issues. Maya walked between tables, hearing snippets of conversation that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Officers were asking residents for advice, while community members offered suggestions for improving neighborhood safety. A teenage girl approached Maya during the break. My friends used to tell me to run when we saw police, she said softly. Now we know Officer Chen by name. She comes to our basketball games and helps with homework at the community center. The success stories kept coming. A local business owner described how officers now walked their beats on foot, getting to know shop owners and customers. A retired teacher shared how the new youth outreach program had transformed her grandson's view of law enforcement. Maya's foundation, started with the settlement money from her case, had grown beyond their initial goals. They now offered scholarships for minority students entering law enforcement, supported police community programs in underserved areas, and funded research into effective reform strategies. As the event wound down, Maya noticed Barrett's replacement, Officer Rivera, chatting with a group of elderly residents. They were planning next month's community safety workshop together, laughing and sharing ideas. This was what real community policing looked like. The evening concluded with a surprise announcement. The City Council had unanimously voted to make their reform program permanent, with guaranteed funding for the next decade. The room erupted in applause, but Maya was watching the quiet moments. An officer helping an elderly man with his coat, a teenager teaching a police cadet a complicated handshake, a rookie officer getting advice from a grandmother. Later that night, as Maya packed up the last of the materials, a small girl approached her with a drawing. It showed police officers and community members holding hands around a heart. "My mom says you helped make our neighborhood better," the girl said simply. Maya drove home under a sky full of stars, thinking about how much had changed in just 1 year. Her phone was full of messages, other cities requesting guidance, medical colleagues sharing success stories, community members planning new initiatives. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed Officer Chen doing her nightly patrol. They waved to each other, no longer doctor and officer, but partners in a shared mission. This was the real victory, not just policy changes or improved statistics, but the countless small moments where trust replaced fear and understanding overcame prejudice. Inside her home, Maya added the little girl's drawing to her wall of memories. Next to her medical degrees and awards now hung something even more precious, proof that one person's courage to stand up for what's right could inspire a community to transform itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Maya felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most beautiful changes. Her story hadn't ended with justice for one person, it had become a catalyst for lasting change that would benefit generations to come.